Hey guys, this is Mr. C, and in this lesson we're going to take a look at adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing integers. And as we all know, the set of integers are the numbers, we'll say integers, and it goes ... -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, and on and on and on in both directions. And so the definition of the set of integers are the whole numbers and their opposites. So we will be dealing with some negative numbers here, and our goal is to be able to do these calculations if the numbers aren't too big without a calculator. So now that we kind of have the setup, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to tackle some addition. And I'm going to keep the numbers pretty simple, and I'm going to say something like 3 plus 2. All right, we all know that if I keep these numbers small like 3 and 2, we all know that 3 plus 2 is going to be equal to 5, right? I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is the thinking that you're going to need to do when these numbers start to become negative. And so the way they usually teach this in textbooks and in videos is that when you're adding two numbers together, two integers, if the signs are the same, you take the sum. And so you take the sum of both of those. So the signs, that's a plus 3, that's a positive 3, even though it doesn't say plus 3, since there's not a negative in front, we do understand that it's positive. So a positive 3 and another positive 2 would make positive 5. So what we do is we take the two numbers and we take the sum of them, if the signs are the same, we add them together and we keep that same sign of both of those numbers at the end. And that's really how you should think about this, because when the negatives come up, then we're gonna have to think of it that way. So, because we're not gonna use a calculator. So let's do another addition. What if we have 3 and then plus a -2? Okay, so what would that be? Well, here we have two numbers, 3 and -2. And again, this 3 in front, since there's no plus or minus, we assume it to be positive, right? These signs are different. And so if they're different and you're adding them, then you take the difference of the two numbers. So the difference between 3 and 2 is 1. Now, what you do is when you take that difference, you take a look at the two signs, and whatever the sign is of the bigger one, that's going to be your answer sign. So like this was positive 5 up here, right? Plus 5. These two are different signs, but the 3 is bigger. We took the difference, we got 1, and then the sign of that 1 is going to be the bigger one right there, which is a positive 1. And again, we don't have to write that plus 1 there. I'm just doing that so you visual learners can see what's happening. So let's think about that differently. What if we had 3 and then a -2? So I'm going to represent the 3 by these 3 chips right here, positive, positive, positive. And I'm going to represent the -2 as 2 negatives, just like that and just like that. Now, we do know that a pair, a positive and a negative, are going to cancel each other out. And when they cancel each other out, they make 0 in pairs. So using these manipulatives, let's see if we can get 1. So this pair is going to cancel each other out and they're gone. This pair is going to cancel out and be gone. And so what's left? A positive 1, just like we thought it would be. All right, so using the manipulatives can sometimes help when we're adding and subtracting. All right, let's take a look at another pair. Let's take these two numbers and let's change the signs of them. Let's make it -3 plus a positive 2. So now what happens? So now we're taking the same two numbers, but I just changed the signs, right? So -3 plus a positive 2. And again, even though there's not a little plus here, I can put a little plus there if it helps. See? That's a positive 2. All right, so now let's see what happens. We do have different signs, so we take the difference of the two numbers, and the difference again of 3 and 2 is 1. I look at my two numbers and I think, which one's the bigger one? Well, the 3 is bigger. The 3 has a negative in front of it, which means I have to put that sign in front of my answer right there as -1. So let's see how that works with the chips again. I've got -3, -1, -2, there's -3, and I have a +2. And I'm going to add those together. Okay, again, they cancel in pairs. A negative and a positive each cancel in a pair. So that pair is gone, that pair is gone, and so it's going to leave, just like we thought, a -1. All right, now, so we've tackled adding, and we could take these two numbers and we could switch them. Let's say 2 plus 3. What's that equal to? Well, we know it's going to be 5 because we've been adding this forever. But remember our property, 3 plus 2 is the same thing as 2 plus 3. And the reason why that is because of our commutative property of addition. So 3 plus 2 and 2 plus 3 are going to be the same sum. And so we're going to get a +5 again. All right. So basically when you're adding two integers, you look at this one and you look at this one right here if the signs are different, because that's usually what is going to mess people up. Let's do one now that has a couple negatives. So if we have a couple negatives now, let me go ahead and switch that out. Let's add two negative numbers together and see what happens. So let's add a -3 plus a -2. Okay. Now, if we go by what I just told you, the little rule here, these two signs of these two integers are the same. What that tells me to do is to take the sum of these two, right? And so the sum of 3 and 2 is 5. Both of the numbers are negative. And so since I'm adding them and the signs are the same, I'm going to take that negative there for both of them and apply it to my answer right there of -5. Now let's see if that makes sense with the chips. So here I have a -3, -1, -2, -3, and here I have a -2. All right, so all of them are negative. None of these are going to cancel out in pairs because there are no pairs. There's no positives anywhere here. And so when that happens, you just have to basically count them all, just like what I'm doing over here. -1, -2, -3, -4, and then all of them would be -5. And so even the chips are going to agree, using the manipulatives, that you are going to get -5 when you add those together. All right, so that's addition. Now let's take a look at some subtraction. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch this out just to keep everything on a different page here. Let's do some subtraction. Let's do 3 take away, and that's 2. All right, we all know that 3 minus 2 is going to be 1. We all know that. But the numbers aren't always going to be this small. So how do we need to think about this right here? And I keep saying in class that addition and subtraction are the same operation. Well, here's the reason why. When you're subtracting, what you're really doing is adding a negative number. Okay, and here's what this looks like. We know that's a +3, right? So what we have here is a +3, and we're really adding a -2 to that. The reason why we are is because we've all learned that when a negative and a positive are together like this, the negative is going to win. And so we usually just write the negative as a minus. Well, that's what I've done right here. So what happens is we're going to get a +3 and a -2, different signs. We take the difference. The difference is 1. And since the difference is 1 and the bigger number is positive, we know that that's going to be a +1. But we already knew that because we know that 3 minus 2 anyway over the years is going to be equal to 1. So what I did here just kind of confirms that, and it makes sense that that's the reason why that's supposed to happen. So now let's take these two numbers and let's switch them. So now let's take 2, take away 3. Okay, so now let's apply our same reasoning here. And again, this is a +2, right? So we have 2 plus a -3. Okay, and then what's that equal? Well, we have different signs, right? And so that's a +2 again. Different signs, we take the difference, and it's going to be 1 again. However, the 3 is bigger than the 2, and the 3 is negative, so I have to apply that at the end as a -1, a -1. And so really, in my world, in my view, negatives and minus are really the same thing to me, because I can always switch this minus here with this addition, but then just make that number negative. So to me, minus and negative is really the same thing. All right, so let's see how this would work if some of these numbers were negative here. So let's do a few examples. Let's do -3 minus 2. Okay, so what would that be? We all know from class that this right here, no matter how big the numbers are, gets messed up a lot, okay? So let's take a look. How do we rewrite that? Well, let's rewrite that as -3 plus a -2. Okay, now we can apply our strategy. Signs are the same, so we take the sum, which is 5. They're both negative, and so I apply the negative to it, and now we have -5, which is correct. Now, a lot of people are going to say 1 or -1 over here, but let's think about it like money. If you owe somebody $3 and then you owe them $2 more, you don't owe them $1, you owe them 5 altogether. And so it makes sense that if you think about this in terms of money, that the answer should be negative and it should be bigger than these at the beginning, right? So let's take a look at another one. Let's do -3 minus -2. Lots of examples we can do. All right, so what do we do here? Well, one thing that we've learned is that when you have two negatives beside each other, two negatives turn into a positive, right? I'm sure we've all seen our teachers do that at some point. Two negatives right next to each other make a positive. So we can actually take this and write it like this, -3 plus 2. So now we have different signs, right? That's a +2. Let me go ahead and put the little plus there just so we can all see that that's positive. We have different signs, so we take the difference. The difference of 3 and 2 is 1. The bigger number is negative, and so we apply that to the answer. So that makes sense. And really, if you think about it, when you subtract a negative, what you're doing is, a negative means you're going in the opposite direction, right? You're going back in the number line, but when you subtract a negative, it's like a double jump. You're going back, and then the next negative jumps you forward again. And that's why that number right there winds up to be positive when you get done, a plus right there. All right, let's try 3 minus, let's say, -4 and see how that works, just to change the numbers up a little. Again, these two negatives are going to cancel each other out because it's a double jump back and forth on the number line. You wind up with 3 plus 4. Signs are the same, so we add the two numbers together. 4 plus 3 is 7, same sign, sum. And it's positive because these two numbers are positive now. So if you have a negative in front, if you subtract a negative, you're going to change that to a plus right there. And so that's why the answer is 7. All right, what else could we do? We talked about negatives in front. We talked about subtracting a negative. We already did this, but we could do another one of those. So what if you have, let's say, -5 and then plus 8? What would that look like? All right, so let's think about this just in terms of money. If you owe somebody $5, but you get 8 back, then you're not in the hole anymore. You're going to get some money back, right? How much will you get back? Well, let's look at these two numbers. These two numbers have different signs, right? Because again, that's a +8 right there, isn't it? So these two numbers are different signs. So we take the difference, and the difference will be 3. The bigger number is positive, and so we apply that over here, and that's why our sum there is going to be a +3 for that one. So we really want to think of subtraction and addition as being the same operation. You're just subtracting, basically, or you're just adding a negative, just like we did up here to this one. And you can go to this video and go back to the beginning and watch this as many times as you want, just so you can kind of get a handle on what's going on here from the initial step. All right. So we got addition and subtraction. Let's talk about multiplication and division a little bit. So let's take a couple numbers. Let's take 6 and 2. So if you take 6 divided by 2, 6 divided by 2, how many times does 2 go into 6? Well, it's going to be 3, isn't it? And so we all know that 6 divided by 2 is 3. Okay, and it's positive. When these two signs are both positive here, like this, the answer is going to be positive. We have no problem with that. That's how it's always been. What if we take the 6 though and make it negative? So now what happens? Well, now we have negative over positive. Now, whenever a negative and a positive come in contact with each other like this, the negative is going to win, right? So we know our answer is going to be negative. We know that 6 divided by 2 is 3. But we got to be careful because a negative and a positive, the negative is going to win, and we're going to make that a negative 3 with division. Let's do another one. Let's do 6 divided by negative 2. Okay, so we're going to make the 2 negative this time. So now what happens? All right, so let's make that, that's a positive 6 up there. All right, so now, again, we know that 6 divided by 2 is 3. I'm giving you these nice ones because we all know what it's supposed to be. But we, again, have a positive and a negative in contact with each other, right up above each other. And again, whenever that happens, the negative is going to win. And so your answer is still going to be negative 3. So does it really matter if the negative is here or here? It does not. As a matter of fact, there's another way you can write it. And you can actually put the negative up front like this, and you will still get negative 3 as your answer. All right? Now, when is that not going to happen? Well, let's see when that may not happen. Let's do negative 6 divided by negative 2. Okay, so we know that 6 divided by 2 is 3. We know that. But again, when two negatives come in contact with each other, they're going to make a positive. And so our final answer here, because we have negative over negative, is going to make positive. All right? So let's now talk about multiplication. Multiplication, let's do 6, and let's do, we can do 3 this time. 6 times 3, same thing as 6.3. We really should not write it like this though. The reason why we shouldn't write it with that little x for the multiplication is because now we have x's in algebra, we have them in our problems as variables, and so we don't want to confuse that with a variable. So I'm not going to write the multiplication like that, okay? So I'm going to write just 6 times 3, or my multiplications with either a dot, or I'll write them in parentheses. I kind of prefer parentheses, but it doesn't matter. All right, so you have positive and positive, and so when you multiply two positive numbers together, you're going to get a positive answer. And so we get positive 18 for our answer. No big deal. So what happens if I make one of them negative? Negative 6 times 3. So this time, the 3 is positive, but then 6 is negative. So when you have a negative and a positive, just like I said before, with division, the negative is going to win with multiplication and division. So this time, you're still going to get 18, but because you have a negative and a positive, the negative is going to win, and it's going to be a negative 18. So let's switch that around. Let's do now 6 times negative 3. Okay, so this time I'm making the 6 positive and the 3 negative. Does that really matter? Not really, because 6 times 3 is still 18. You still have a positive and a negative together, right? Side by side. And so the negative is going to win, and it's going to give you a negative 18 again. So now, the only other thing I haven't talked about is if we have two negatives, negative 6 and negative 3. All right, so here we have negative 6 times negative 3, right? 6 times 3 is 18, so I know that's going to be involved somewhere. But what happens when you have two negatives side by side again? Two negatives make a positive. And so what happens is you wind up with your answer as positive 18. With these, it's going to help you tremendously if you know your multiplication facts, at least through 12s or something like that. So kind of get familiar with that. Try really hard not to have to use a calculator every time, because not only does it slow you down, but there's a lot of times when teachers will not allow you to use a calculator. And on the EOC, a lot of times you don't get to use a calculator for either a whole day or not at all in some states or cases. So just kind of be careful. practice, and then we'll give you lots of practice on that in class. So I hope this helps, and thank you guys. We will see you later.